Hello, this is Peter Gallagher, and this is my life in the theater. Grease. The crazy thing about Grease and Hair is I got both those jobs from an open call. My experience with the open call was you got there right at the crack of dawn, if you could, like 7, 8, that's not quite the crack of dawn, but 7 a.m. or so. And stuck to the door of the audition room would be a clipboard with yellow legal paper and tons and tons and tons of names. And you go to the end, the last stack, and put your name in. And I was always number 2,000 something. And then you go get on the end of a blocks long line, clutching your headshot and your resume, special skills, driving, and just stay there until 10 a.m. when the door would open and you'd begin to inch forward, inch forward, inch forward. And one of the first open calls I went to was for Grease. And there have been a few angels in my life, and one of them was a guy I was in college with, Henry Kelston, who was putting me up in his grandmother's apartment where he was staying. And I told him I was going to audition for everything, no matter what. And then I went to see Grease. I thought, oh my God, I can't do anything in the show. I can't sing that high. I could never be Danny Zuko. I couldn't. I said, yeah, I'm not going to go. You mean, didn't you just tell me you were going to go and audition for everything, and now you say you're not? Well, what's that all about? And so I thought, he's right. So I thought of all this shtick, what I was going to do, and singing Put Your Head on My Shoulder. And I'm online, getting ready to go, and I'm inching forward, up the stairs, up there, and about 6 hours or so later, I'm one person away from going into the audition room. And the guy in front of me is singing, Jeremiah was a bullfrog. I thought, he did it so well. I thought, I'm going to leave. There's no point in my proceeding. But all of a sudden, the door opened, and I was inside. And I thought, I'm just going to sing this song like I mean it, like I really mean it. Phyllis Grandy was on the piano, and Vinnie Liff was running the audition. And I sang, Put Your Head on My Shoulder. And Vinnie Liff looked up and he said, that was beautiful. My knees buckled, eyes filled with tears, and I nearly fell over. And I felt like, that's all I need. I said, I don't need the job. It just gave me reason to believe that I'm not totally crazy. And then I had another 1,000,000 auditions for that and 1,000,000 auditions for Hair, and I ended up getting Hair first. The revival of Hair. That was my Broadway debut. Annie Golden, Loretta Devine, and a wonderful, wonderful cast. And then I kept auditioning for Grease during this period of time. While we were in previews for Hair, I had another audition for Grease. I went down 8th Avenue and auditioned, and I guess I was supposed to stick around, but I didn't stick around. I had to get back to, we were rehearsing during the day in Hair, and I'm going up 8th Avenue, and all of a sudden, Vinnie Liff is hollering at me on 8th Avenue, Peter, they want you. I said, what? They want you. And it was for a bus and truck of Grease. And he explained what was going on. He said, we'll fly you to Schenectady, or maybe it was Utica for some press, and we'll do this. And as I said, I didn't have any agents, so I didn't really know how anything worked. And I went to Tom O'Horgan at Hair. I said, Tom, I've been doing this for a while. You guys keep changing Claudes, and anybody could be doing what I'm doing. I got this other opportunity. Would you mind if I left and did that? And he looked at me like I was crazy. And I think the only reason it worked is because he knew I didn't know any better. He said, well, let me talk to the guys. And so they said, sure. He said, you want to go on as Claude on your last show? And I said, no, it's all right. Let me just sing Electric Blues and do my thing, and I'll be gone. Then I just left. And then went on the road with Grease, and I ended up being on Grease on Broadway for probably 500 performances. And I still have, David Paymer is still probably my best friend in the world. He was Sonny Lattieri. I think I replaced Buddy Swayze, Adrian Zmed. And it was an extraordinary training ground because there were no critics. The show was going to run. You could be terrible one day and much better the next, but you got a chance to keep doing it. And friends that I've had for a lifetime and that I'm still in touch with. So these were two great experiences. Well, I had only one audition. I mean, I really only had, I had two audition songs. The Grease had to be a 50s, and it was Put Your Head on My Shoulder. Put your head on my shoulder. And then Hair was Corner of the Sky. In fact, I ran into Mark Shaman the other day at Mike McGraw's memorial service, and he said, I think I played for you during your Hair audition. I think you sang Corner of the Sky. I said, probably, because we all sang Corner of the Sky. Everybody, every guy sang Corner of the Sky. So I knew two songs. And that was one of them. And and like every one of these experiences was defined by the people I was with. And the opportunity I had to, work with Tom O'Horgan and Tom Moore and get to know, Jerry Ragney and Jim Rado and Galt McDermott and these extraordinarily creative people that were very generous. And speaking of which, the next show was A Doll's Life, where I got to work with the amazing Hal Prince and Ruth Mitchell, Florence Klotz, Betty Comden, and Adolph Green. And years later, when I did On the 20th Century, I could still hear Adolph and Betty's voices in my ear as I'd be saying lines or I'd read it, because they were writing that show around the same time. And A Doll's Life, I had done a couple of movies, and I made a promise to myself that I'll always come back to Broadway. Do a couple of movies, I'm gonna come back to Broadway. And I did, and it was great working with Hal. And the crazy thing is that the lighting designer for A Doll's Life was Ken Billington, who was the lighting designer for Left on 10th. So a couple of weeks ago, as I'm standing on stage at the James Earl Jones Theater, Ken Billington is in the house saying, Peter, could you move a couple of steps, stage left? Yeah, one more downstage. And all of a sudden, 42 years evaporated. The only difference, he was still as tall as he's always been, the tallest man in the world. But our hair had gone a little white. But other than that, it felt like nothing had changed. And I also remember that Hal had me wear a mask at the opening of A Doll's Life. And my parents, I think probably the first show my parents ever saw on Broadway I was in, I think it was Grease. My father didn't realize that I was Danny Zuko. At the intermission, he said, so when's Peter coming out? I said, Tom, that's him. What did he do to his hair? Tom, a leather jacket? And so they were not, that was the world I came from. Like no theater, no music, no experience at all with that world. And so now that they were a little more experienced, they came to see A Doll's Life, and I have this mask on. And then in the middle of the opening thing, I take the mask off, and it's me. And all of a sudden, I hear my mother say, oh, Tom, look, it's Peter. I hear my father say, where? Where? Well, some things never change. And it was just George Hearn, Edmund Lindeck, Betsy Jocelyn, just the greatest cast, and doing a Hal Prince show. It was just part of a rich Broadway experience. The corn is green. Oh my goodness. I just saw my pal Kieran O'Reilly, who's just created the Irish Repertory Theater, and he and I were coal miners together. And I was supposed to do Another Country on Broadway. We'd done it out of town at Long Day's Journey, at the Longworth Theater. And our producer backed out, and all of a sudden we had this time before my next gig, which was The Corn is Green. So I asked my wife to marry me. And she said yes. I said, well, let's go on a honeymoon. He said yes. I said, let's go to Ireland. I said, okay. And let's go to Wales. Why? Because there are coal mines in Wales. I can learn the dialect. We can find coal miners. Maybe we can even go to a coal mine. And she said, really? Yeah, it's gonna be great. And so we did. Basically, I got to deduct my honeymoon. But it was an amazing experience because I met this old miner, Owen Thomas, at a mining museum. And I started talking to him. And one thing led to another. I met a bunch of his other retired miner friends, and we sat around and read The Corn is Grain. So, oh, he's really giving it to you now, boy, oh. And the other crazy thing was, and we went down into a mine shaft, about a half mile below the earth, sent my poor bride down to one of the firemen down in one of his booths, asking for directions to the subway. And he thought he was losing his mind because also it was really bad luck to have a woman in the mines. But we had fun, and finally she said, could we go to London now? I said, right. And the crazy thing is Elizabeth Taylor was producing The Corn is Green. And she and Richard Burton were out on Private Lives. They were on Broadway with Private Lives while we were on the road. And also, Cicely was married to Miles Davis. Cicely was amazing. I loved working with her. And when at our opening night party in Washington, D.C., I met Miles Davis because he was married to Cicely. And he was the most handsome man I'd ever seen. He came up to me and said, how come you didn't kiss Cicely? Excuse me? At the end of the play, how come you didn't kiss Cicely? I said, well, because she was my teacher. I don't think, students did that in the 1880s. She said, you should have kissed Cicely. And we closed like in 3 weeks after we opened, so he might have been right. I probably should have kissed Cicely. And another guy came, how come you were limping in the first act, you weren't limping in the second act? To another actor. Wow, Miles Davis is not this thing. We arrived, came off the road, arrived at our theater for The Corn is Green. And there on my dressing room table, my makeup table in my dressing room, the whole room was covered in felt because Richard Burton always had everything covered in red felt. And he was from Wales. And The Corn is Green was basically his story. In fact, his dresser was the son of the playwright of The Corn is Green. Emlyn Williams' son, George, was Richard Burton's dresser. And there on the dressing table was a telegram, Richard Burton, to me, which said, win the scholarship, Boyle, and a folded Welsh flag. That was very cool. And then, the real thing. The real thing was one of the most extraordinary experiences I ever had. Because my first experience with a hit, opening a hit, and it was with an amazing cast. And I couldn't help but think, God, if I could, am I going to measure up? What's it going to be like working with Mike Nichols, Jeremy Irons, and Glenn Close, and Christine Baranski, and Cynthia Nixon, who was still in high school, and this amazing group of people on a new play by Tom Stoppard. The crazy thing is, the two plays we saw on our honeymoon in London, one of them was The Real Thing, the other was Noises Off, both of which I ended up doing. And so they were going to replace the actor that they had cast out of town in The Real Thing, and they asked me to come up and see the show, and if I wanted to replace this actor. And it was a small role, but it was Mike Nichols and all this, Tom Stoppard. And fortunately, my wife was with me when we went to see it. And afterwards, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't do it like this. I'd do it like that and that. I see, and this and that and this, and I just don't, I don't know. And she said, why don't you just tell Mike that? Mike Nichols, talk to Mike Nichols, tell him what I had on my Mike Nichols. I knew she was right. So the next day I met with Mike Nichols. I said, well, hello, Mr. Nichols. I said, well, if I were to do it, I was imagining it this and this and this. And he said, great, try it. Then all of a sudden I realized working with the best is the easiest thing you'll ever do. And it was just amazing. And we had amazing note sessions. Tom Stoppard and Mike Nichols. We would all be crammed together on cast off furniture from other productions, underneath the stage while we were in previews. And I remember I was crammed next to Glennie, and Cynthia was here, Jeremy was there, and Vito, and Kenny, and we're all just like, stuffed into this. And Tom Stoppard says, Cynthia, that passage there, it wants to be a bit more plangent. And I can tell Glenn has no idea what that means. I have no idea what that means. And as I look down and think, nobody has any idea what plangent means, and nobody's saying anything except for Cynthia, because she's young, she's honest. She said, I'm sorry, Tom, what's plangent? Oh, plangent. Mike? Fuck if I know. Well, for instance, a guitar is more plangent than a trumpet. Still nothing. We were like, what the fuck is plangent? I don't know. I'm sorry. Well, it's as if you were to take a pebble and drop it into a pool from a very small height. Plangent. Oh, that was so plangent. And we tried to use that word in speech for the rest of the run, and nobody succeeded. But that was the kind of company we were keeping. As well as the fact that my very first performance, I only had about an hour and a half rehearsal, because I came in out of town and it was just on stage, and when we were, getting ready for the first preview on the theater, and then I was like trying to keep my nerves. And there was some kind of terrorist threat or some kind of agitation threat or something in town. It was 1984 then. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I'm on the turntable getting ready to be spun out for my first entrance in this play and to have this scene with Glenn Close on the train. I'm just trying to breathe and stay calm, and all of a sudden, there's explosions. Holy shit, it's happening. And I'm waiting for people to start screaming and running for the exits and all this stuff, and nothing happens, and the turntable spins out, and everybody's sitting there like nothing happened. And I could not remember a fucking thing. I could not remember anything. I was like, and then by the grace of God, I did remember my first line, and then it all went very well, and I forgot all about that. The next night, the exact same thing happened. I thought, okay, I'm losing my mind. Turns out Jason Robards was next door, and You Can't Take It With You. As a grandpa with the explosions and the fireworks downstairs in the basement, blowing that up at the exact same time every night. And he was a pal too, so we had a laugh about that. It was kind of a great thing being on Broadway at that period of time, because, when I was doing Grease, I walked down the alleyway to visit my friend Maureen Stapleton, and we'd sort of, try to polish off an enormous bottle of Gallo wine together. Or we'd see Henry Fonda going into the stage door for First Monday in October. And there were just so many of these titans, these legends that we all admired that were still active. Jason Robards, Colleen Dewhurst, I did a production of a stage reading of Long Day's Journey with them. And then years later, we were doing a movie and said, hey kid, you want to go see where O'Neill wrote the play? We went on a road trip up to the Dow House and saw where O'Neill wrote the play. So the real thing was a really powerful, wonderful experience. I think I did it for a year. And I got to know Mike Nichols, and the beginning of a relationship I had for the rest of my life, where, he gave me, I remember talking to him once about what was important as a father as I got older. And he said, well, just as long as they know, the kids know, that things that start out poorly don't always end poorly. Things that start out well don't always end well. That and study improv. Because he was convinced that the reason he succeeded as a director in the movies was because he had the ability to think quickly on his feet. The funny thing about The Real Thing, so I was 29 by the time I finished it. I did it for about a year, and I didn't get really any other auditions or meetings or anything, and I started to really doubt myself. And I went through a really difficult time once I left the show, where I lost all my confidence. I went back to a beginning acting class, kind of tried to start over, and it really shook me to the core. It's like when you're 29, it's almost like a mini midlife crisis, where you have a chance to become the person you want to be, or you can keep banging your head against the wall. And so the one thing I wanted to feel was authentic in my craft, and I didn't trust myself. I didn't have confidence in myself. And so when it came to, I was asked to audition for there are two shows I wanted to do in my life were Long Day's Journey into Night to play Edmund and Guys and Dolls to play Sky. And so when it came time to audition for Long Day's Journey into Night, I was still not quite back on my feet in a way. And so the audition came and I didn't go. First time ever, I just didn't go. I thought, I have nothing to contribute. I'm no good. What could I possibly contribute here? And Manny Eisenberg called me. Love him forever. He was our producer of The Real Thing and of Long Day's Journey into Night. He said, "Hey, Peter, it's Manny. Listen, I'm Jewish, but half of me is Italian. And if you don't come in tomorrow and audition for this part, I'm gonna break both your fucking legs." And I was so moved by that he cared. And I said, and I was fighting back the tears. I said, "Thank you, Manny. I'll be there." And then he was another angel in my life. It just came when I just needed somebody to, believe in me. And I came without any expectation. But fortunately, it was Jonathan Miller who was directing our production of Long Day's Journey into Night. And he saw something in that. Even my agents at the time, I said, "I think I might get this part." He said, "No, you're not. This guy's getting it." "How do you know?" "We know." And, but I ended up getting the part. And it was really just a powerful, powerful, powerful experience. Jack Lemmon played our father. And he was like he gave me my first set of golf clubs. And I remember when we were in London at the old Haymarket Theatre. I also remember while we were at the old Haymarket Theatre, Hal Prince called me up. He said, "Hey, Peter, listen, I got a new show. It's our final dress before previews start. Can you make it? It's right across the street from your theater." I said, "Sure, what's it called?" "Called Phantom of the Opera." I said, "Yeah, okay." And so I go over for the last dress. And then I see the chandelier about to swing and hit the cast. I leap up, about to holler to warn the cast that they're about to get wiped out when I see the little glint of the guy wire, the safety line on that. I said, "How? You tricked me. You got me." And I called him and said, "It's amazing. I think you got a big hit." "Yeah, I think so too. All right, gotta go." And so that was when I was doing Long Day's Journey at the old Haymarket Theatre. And Jack and I got very close because we were on the road and we came back and we did a couple movies after that. And when he was really good, we had some great scenes together as father and son. When he was really on, he'd say, hey kid, listen, you want to do a little work after the show? I'll buy you a sandwich." And that meant that once we'd seen our guests and so on, and they left, we'd go back out onto the stage, which is just lit by the ghost light, and work on the scenes. He said, and he would say, I know what I did was good, but how do I do it again? Why? What? I said, "Well, Jack, let's work on it." He just told me a story. So we'd do that, we'd feel better, we'd find stuff. I remember one night he was leaving, he's going, hey kid, you got anything lined up yet?" I said, "No, Jack." And he says, and he leaves. I thought, oh my God, it's never going to change. But it made me feel so much better because I had company, great company. So that was a powerful experience, Long Day's Journey into Night, because it also spoke to my Irish-American heritage in a powerful way. My father often called me lunkhead. And then, just before I did Guys and Dolls, which is the next one, a few years later, I was doing a play in London for television of Clifford Odets' The Big Knife with Stubby Kaye and Irene Worth and Nehemiah Persoff and a wonderful cast. And Stubby and I got along great. He played golf too, but he was a wonderful actor and we just hit it off. And he, of course, was the original Nicely Nicely Johnson in Guys and Dolls on Broadway and in the movie. And after I auditioned about 80 times for Guys and Dolls and I was going to get the part, I called up Stubby. I said, "Stubby, you're not going to believe this. I just got cast in a big, huge revival of Guys and Dolls and I get to play Sky Masterson. And he goes, "Oh, Pete, that's great. Hey, listen, a friend of mine played Sky a few years ago, and he wore a light blue hat and a light blue suit. Don't do that." I said, "I'll keep that in mind." And also ran just before I ran into Julie Stein. Oh, well, the great Julie Stein, who knew I was going to be doing Guys and Dolls. I said, "I got to tell you a story about Frank Lesserby." So Frank, when he was writing the show, would hole himself up in a hotel room, in Times Square area, and did not want to be disturbed by anybody, any way, no how. But he was my pal, so what was I going to do? Not say hello? So I go over to the hotel. I buzz up, and Frank says, "Yeah? What do you want?" I says, "Frank, it's Julie. Can I come up and see you?" And Frank says, "Only if you got some rhymes for Mink." So that was my experience with the show before I started doing Guys and Dolls. The experience of doing Guys and Dolls was bittersweet because what I didn't realize was that our director thought that the problem with Guys and Dolls was that Sky and Sarah weren't funny. And so he did his best to get us on and get us off, and rehearsed us separately and so on. So it made it challenging. I was very proud of what I was able to accomplish in that environment, and I was very grateful for Jerry's apology a couple of years after that. But what got me through was Abe Burrows and Frank Lesser. I got to sing those songs. I got to say those words with a wonderful cast. And I think it's the greatest show ever written. And I think Sky and Sarah can be a little funny too, and more. Someday I'll write a book. And then Noise is Off. This was an amazing experience. Our first day of rehearsal was 9/11. We were doing this outrageous slapstick farce when the greatest tragedy we could ever have imagined happened. The firehouse right around the corner from us, Ladder 4, Engine 54, lost 15 guys. There was evidence of devastation everywhere you looked. It was still in the sky. It was still on your shoes. And we had no idea what the future was going to be for anything. There was talk that Broadway was done. Broadway, nobody would go to the theater anymore. It was too dangerous. When we were in previews, there was still anthrax in the air. People, suspected putting anthrax in the air. And here we were doing a door-slamming, outrageous farce. And we opened our doors for the first preview, and the audience filled that theater. And they laughed, and they laughed, and they made sounds like, children were mortified about the noises their parents were making. And it sounded like surgery without anesthesia. People were howling and screeching and had tears in their eyes after the show, grateful to know they could still laugh. And I felt so enormously lucky to be contributing to that story at that point in New York. If something bad happened, I could race up by foot to my apartment and be there in no time. And in the meantime, here was telling this story, and we were packing them in every performance. I just felt like the luckiest person in the world. And the crazy thing is, it was Bring Your Daughter to Work Day at the Brooks Atkinson Theater. My daughter was 8. And so I was friendly with the house staff, and I said, "Listen, I'm bringing my little girl." "Oh, yeah, no problem." So I had 2 little seats, and as the director in the show, I would be in the audience and on stage and come back and forth and directing the play and the director of the book. And so I was able to run off and come back and sit next to my little girl. I said, "Okay, this is going to happen next. I'm going to be, okay, I'll be right back." Go up and do the thing. Well, it turns out that she made her Broadway debut in that theater a few years later. And some of the guys backstage, the stage doorman and the carpenter, Mike, and a bunch of the guys were still there when she made, "Hey, Catherine, how you doing?" And there's that other aspect of life on Broadway, which is not just the people in the cast, not just the people in the seats. It's the guys, the carpenters and the flymen and, the makeup artists and the the wig person and the wardrobe person and your dresser and all of these wonderful creatures that live in the theater and make the theater happen by hand were there. And they endure. In fact, the next show I did, The Country Girl, was at the Bernard Jacobs Theater, but it used to be called the Royale, which is where we did Grease. So I walk in the first day to the theater, and all of a sudden I hear this voice from the darkness. Pete, what the fuck are you doing here? I look, I said, Mike? Yeah, what the fuck are you doing here? And it was Mike Van Praagh, whose dad, Al Van Praagh, was I think the head carpenter, and he and his brother, James Van Praagh, who became a psychic, we were all about the same age. We were all starting out years ago, and here he was still there. And so there's just these connections and relationships that survive shows. It's really not about the shows that are hits or the shows that are flops. In my mind, they're all defined by the people and the experiences. And it really has not much to do with how successful they were. And for The Country Girl, that was another chance I had to work with Mike Nichols. A friend of mine let me stay in his apartment up on the Upper East Side, and I'd drive into work every day with Mike. And I'd hear stories, and I'd learn as much as I could. And that really defined the experience. And also with Morgan Freeman, who was in the play, he and I would sing and dance before the show every day. We'd either sing Frank Sinatra or Al Green and dance. And we were talking one day, and the very first Broadway show I saw was Hello, Dolly, with Cab Calloway and Pearl Bailey. And my high school teacher, I'd never been to Broadway, I didn't know what to expect, and my mind was blown. And he said, yeah, well, I played Rodolfo in that production. I said, get out. Yeah. So the very first Broadway show I saw, Morgan was Rodolfo, and then 100 years later, I'm doing a play with him on Broadway. On the 20th Century. Wow. It's so funny. This is a great show by Cy Coleman and Comden and Green. As I say, I could still hear Betty and Adolph's voices every time I would read the play. And this was a little challenging because I got very sick in the previews. And I had made the fatal mistake of saying, somebody asked me how many shows I'd done, performances I'd done. I'd say, a couple thousand, 2,300, something like that. How many shows? I probably had, I don't even want to say the words because I'm in a show now and I don't want to jinx anything. But indicating that, like, a handful that I'd missed. Well, I made up for it on that show because I got sick. I had a sinus infection that went undiagnosed despite repeated visits to the doctor, and I was allergic to something in my dressing room, maybe mold and something this and this, and it was just the perfect storm of misfortune. But I dug down deep and managed to get through, and ultimately was really proud of what I was able to do. And Ken Billington also did the lighting for that, and he said, John Cullum, who played the part I played, his voice was never the same after that show. He was permanently harmed by it, which I get, because it's a brutal show, which is part of the reason why I wanted to do it. And Kristen Chenoweth, I would marvel at, because she could be missing a limb and never miss a note. And she was just an example of great strength and accomplishment to me. And the other sad thing was that my trio was Mark Lynn Baker and Mike McGraw. And I just went to Mike's memorial service 2 days ago. And he was just so talented. And when our set would crash and we'd have to stop the show, we had problems with the set every once in a while. I'd say to go to the stage manager, I said, listen, we can't let that audience go cold. I said, I'm gonna go out there and do something. You cool with that? He said, yeah, absolutely. I said, Mark, come on. Really? I said, yeah. Mike, come on. Great, let's go. And we would go out and entertain the audience and ad lib and make jokes and have fun. And I will always cherish every moment I've ever had with either of those guys. And I'm so sorry I'm not gonna have a chance to do them again with Mike. Which brings us to Left on 10th, my second show with Ken Billington. All I can say is I'm so glad to still be doing it. Because if you stick around long enough, every once in a while, things get really great. And this experience has been really great. Susan Stroman, I feel like we're cut from the same cloth, from that same era that I came from. The experience has been very reminiscent of those early shows, and that inclusiveness and that warmth and that lack of meanness and support, as well as innovation. And the cast, Juliana Margulies, I am so lucky to be working with. She makes it very easy. Peter Francis James and Katie McCluggage. I don't know how they do what they do. And to bring a new play on Broadway, which is a perilous and exciting undertaking. And fortunately, it's been more exciting than perilous. And I think our audiences are really loving it. And written by the wonderful Delia Ephron, who lived it. I can't believe I did all these shows. It feels like it was just yesterday. I guess not. Let's see what's next.